Welcome back to Smile and Scars, the channel where real life encounters turn into unforgettable stories of survival, courage, and unexpected connections. Today's story takes us to a remote, deserted island where I got stranded with my boss. What began as a routine work trip quickly became a life-changing experience when she said, "If no one comes, will you stay with me?" The trip started like any other business retreat: early flights, presentations, and team-building exercises. My boss, known for her sharp wit and commanding presence at work, seemed completely ordinary in the professional environment. I had never imagined that within a single day, the two of us would be stranded on a deserted island, forced to rely on each other for survival. The initial chaos of the storm, an unexpected detour, felt unreal, almost like a scene from a movie. It began when our small chartered boat encountered unexpectedly rough waters. The weather forecast had predicted mild seas, but a sudden shift in the wind created turbulent waves that tossed our vessel violently. Panic set in as we tried to maintain control, but the current was relentless. Every minute felt like a lifetime, and fear gripped us both as the boat began to take on water. Amid the chaos, my boss's composure surprised me. She barked instructions calmly, her voice cutting through the roaring waves, giving me tasks that helped stabilize our small craft. Eventually, the waves forced us onto the shore of an island that was completely uninhabited. The boat was damaged, supplies were minimal, and the realization that we were stranded began to sink in. The first hours were tense. Neither of us had prepared for survival situations, and the environment was harsh. Cold winds, unfamiliar terrain, and dense forest surrounding a small sandy beach. We quickly understood that cooperation wasn't optional. It was the only way we might survive until help arrived. We scavenged what we could from the boat and the shoreline: food, supplies, flares, blankets, and tools. My boss's practicality amazed me. She immediately began organizing what little we had, prioritizing shelter, warmth, and signaling for rescue. While I struggled to keep up, she moved with an efficiency that reminded me why she was so respected at work. Yet, beneath her professionalism, I noticed glimpses of vulnerability, slight hesitation, brief moments where fear flickered across her face. It humanized her, and it changed my perception entirely. As night fell, the cold began to seep into our bones. We built a small makeshift shelter from debris and tarps salvaged from the boat, huddling together for warmth. She turned to me and said something I hadn't expected. "We'll have to keep each other warm tonight if we want to make it through." At first, I wasn't sure if she meant it literally or as a light-hearted attempt to ease tension. But the underlying seriousness in her tone suggested she was acutely aware of how dire our situation was. The night was long, punctuated by the sounds of crashing waves and the occasional rustle of wildlife in the distance. We shared stories to distract ourselves from fear, laughing nervously at small jokes. It was in these moments, close to the edge of panic, that I realized how much we depended on each other. We weren't just colleagues or boss and subordinate anymore. We were partners in survival, each responsible for the other's safety. The intimacy of reliance created a bond neither of us could have anticipated. Morning arrived with the first light filtering through the makeshift shelter. Our supplies were minimal, and it was clear that finding food and fresh water would be essential if we were to survive for more than a day. My boss again took the lead. She suggested a plan. We would explore the island carefully, mapping out potential resources, shelter areas, and places where we might signal for help. Every decision had weight. Every misstep could have consequences, and the stakes were frighteningly real. We spent hours moving cautiously through the island, collecting edible plants, fruits, and what little seafood we could find along the shoreline. Each discovery was a small victory, and each challenge tested our resilience. I noticed a change in my boss during this time. Her professional facade softened. We joked, shared memories from work, and began to see each other in a different light. Survival was bringing out sides of her personality that I had never witnessed in an office setting. The sun was relentless, and the heat combined with exhaustion began to take a toll. By afternoon, we found a small freshwater stream and decided to build a more permanent shelter nearby. While we worked, our conversations deepened. She asked about my family, my ambitions, and even my fears. I shared more than I had in months of casual office conversations. The vulnerability of our situation created a unique connection. Trust formed in ways I had never expected. As the day turned to evening, the wind grew colder and the darkness began to descend. We huddled in the shelter again, sharing warmth and talking quietly. She looked at me, eyes serious, and asked, "Do you think we'll get out of here soon?" I shrugged, unsure. The uncertainty was overwhelming, yet there was a strange comfort in sharing it with someone who understood the fear without judgment. The night passed slowly, but the bond between us strengthened, unspoken and undeniable. By the second night, exhaustion had set in. Our bodies ached, and our clothes were damp from the island's humidity. Despite the hardship, there was a strange rhythm to our survival. We had routines now, gathering supplies during the day, maintaining the shelter, and keeping watch for any signs of rescue. Conversations had become deeper, more personal. She confided fears she hadn't shared with anyone, and I found myself revealing my own doubts and insecurities. Trust had replaced hierarchy. We were equals in this isolated struggle. And then, just as we were beginning to lose hope, she turned to me and asked the question I had never anticipated. "If no one comes, will you stay with me?" Her tone was soft, tinged with vulnerability, but also hope. I froze, unsure how to respond. The words carried weight beyond the immediate survival. They implied connection, desire, and an emotional depth I hadn't considered. The storm had forced honesty out of both of us, and now, confronted with this question, I realized how deeply our isolation had changed everything. I paused, thinking carefully about the implications. The island had stripped away pretense, revealing the raw, unguarded selves beneath. Her question was more than literal. It was a test of trust, loyalty, and willingness to face the unknown together. And in that moment, I understood that the experience had already transformed the dynamic between us. The island, the storm, and the struggle for survival had created a bond that would be impossible to ignore once we returned to the world beyond. We sat together quietly, the reality of our situation settling over us like the night sky. There was no immediate answer, no need for words to fill the space between us. Survival had created intimacy, reliance, and trust elements that transcended traditional relationships. We both understood that the days ahead would test us further, but the connection we had forged provided strength neither of us had anticipated. By the end of part 1, it was clear that this was not just a story of survival. It was a story of trust, vulnerability, and the unexpected ways human connections can deepen under extreme circumstances. The storm, the isolation, and the reliance on each other had brought us to a point where nothing would be the same again. The morning after her question, the island felt different. The previous night had changed something between us, an unspoken understanding had formed, as though the storm had stripped away the barriers we carried from our everyday lives. We were no longer just boss and subordinate. We were companions facing a harsh reality together, and every decision now carried more weight. The first task of the day was securing food and fresh water. The shelter we had built was adequate, but we knew survival meant more than just warmth. It required planning, foraging, and strategic use of the limited resources we had salvaged from the boat. We divided responsibilities, each taking on tasks we were naturally suited for. She moved with surprising agility, her hands steady as she crafted tools and organized supplies, while I focused on exploring the surrounding areas for edible plants and safe spots for freshwater collection. As we ventured deeper into the island, the landscape revealed its harsh beauty. Dense forest gave way to rocky cliffs, and streams trickled into hidden pools. Each step was cautious, the ground was slippery, and unseen roots and rocks threatened to trip us at any moment. Yet every discovery, whether a cluster of fruit or a secure freshwater source, was a small victory that kept our morale alive. Her enthusiasm for finding even minor resources was infectious, reminding me to stay positive despite the growing fatigue. We returned to the shelter with our findings and began preparing a simple meal. Using a small fire we managed to spark, we cooked what little seafood we had gathered and boiled water to make it safe for drinking. Sitting together over the warmth of the fire, I noticed how the intimacy of our situation had shifted. Our conversation flowed freely now, spanning topics we would never discuss in the office. She laughed at small jokes, admitted to fears she'd never shared, and I found myself opening up in ways that surprised me. After the meal, we planned the day's activities with more urgency. There was a need to create a signal for potential rescuers, a fire visible from the air, markings in the sand, anything that could attract attention. She suggested building a large platform on higher ground to increase visibility. While climbing the rocky terrain, the proximity and reliance on each other were palpable. Each handhold and supporting gesture, though practical, carried an undertone of intimacy we were both aware of but had yet to acknowledge. The work was exhausting, and sweat mixed with the salty sea air. Every movement required effort, and each step was a test of endurance. Despite the physical strain, we encouraged each other constantly, our words becoming a source of emotional strength. At one point, she stumbled on a loose rock, and I instinctively caught her arm. Our eyes met, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. Survival had intertwined with something deeper, trust, reliance, and an emotional connection that had grown under the harsh conditions. By mid-afternoon, we had finished constructing the platform. It was a modest structure, but visible enough to increase the chances of being spotted by passing ships or planes. We sat atop it, surveying the vast ocean beyond, sharing a quiet sense of accomplishment. In the silence, she turned to me again, her voice softer than before, asking, "Do you think anyone will find us soon?" I shrugged, uncertain, but the shared look between us conveyed that we were both thinking the same thing. If no one came, we would have to rely entirely on each other. Evening approached with a chill that seeped into our bones. We returned to the shelter, huddling together for warmth. The fire we maintained flickered against the darkness, casting shadows across our faces. The unspoken tension from her question the previous night lingered. Yet it was tempered by mutual respect and the shared experience of survival. We spoke quietly, discussing strategies for rationing food, staying hydrated, and keeping spirits high. Each conversation deepened our bond, weaving trust and vulnerability into the fabric of our companionship. As night fell, she initiated a conversation about our lives outside the island. She asked about childhood memories, hopes for the future, and regrets we had carried. I shared stories I had never told anyone, and she reciprocated, revealing sides of herself hidden beneath the professional exterior. There was a rawness to our dialogue, a truthfulness that could only emerge in isolation, where survival made pretenses meaningless. It was in these moments that I began to see her not just as my boss, but as a person, complex, human, and deeply relatable. The following days became a routine of exploration, resource management, and growing familiarity with each other's rhythms. We learned to anticipate each other's needs, which food items the other preferred, how each coped with exhaustion, and the subtle cues that indicated stress or fatigue. Our survival relied on this synchronization, but beyond practicality, it deepened our emotional connection. Moments of laughter emerged naturally, small victories celebrated with genuine enthusiasm, and even minor disagreements were resolved quickly through compromise and understanding. One afternoon, while exploring a hidden part of the island, we stumbled upon a small cave. It offered protection from the elements and a place to store supplies. Setting up this new shelter area required effort, but it also provided an opportunity to work together more closely. As we moved rocks, secured supplies, and reinforced the cave entrance, physical proximity fostered a growing awareness of each other's presence in a more personal, intimate sense. Later that evening, while sitting by the fire near the cave, she turned to me again. "I still wonder," she began softly, "if no one comes, will you stay with me?" The question, repeated from days before, now carried a different weight. The shared hardships, reliance, and growing trust had created a connection that transcended survival. Her vulnerability was no longer just hypothetical. It was real, anchored in shared experience. I realized that the island had forced an emotional intimacy that neither of us could ignore. Our conversation that night was honest and open. We discussed fears of being stranded indefinitely, the emotional toll of isolation, and the possibility of never returning to our normal lives. The fear was accompanied by a strange sense of liberation. We were free from societal expectations, professional hierarchies, and conventional boundaries. In this isolated world, honesty was necessary, and emotional barriers had little relevance. Through the following days, survival challenges intensified. We faced sudden rainstorms, rising tides, and the ongoing threat of dehydration and hunger. Each challenge tested our physical and emotional resilience, and each time we leaned on one another. The moments of crisis highlighted the depth of our reliance. Holding each other close for warmth was no longer purely practical. It had become a source of comfort, a reminder that we were not alone. The dynamic between us shifted subtly but undeniably. Daily routines, from collecting water to securing firewood, were punctuated by gestures of care, concern, and silent acknowledgement of our growing connection. We found ourselves seeking proximity, sharing warmth in subtle ways, and offering reassurance in moments of fear or uncertainty. The shared experience had created a bond that was both practical and emotional, blending survival necessity with human connection. One night, after a particularly grueling day of gathering supplies and reinforcing the shelter, we sat together, exhaustion etched on our faces. She looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen before and asked quietly, "If no one comes, will you stay?" This time, there was no hesitation in her eyes. Only trust, vulnerability, and hope. The repetition of the question was no longer about survival alone. It was about acknowledgement of feelings, connection, and the human need for closeness in extreme circumstances. By now, the island had become a place where our relationship was no longer defined by the roles we had occupied in the outside world. The hierarchy of boss and subordinate had disappeared, replaced by a partnership built on trust, cooperation, and emotional reliance. Our interactions were sincere, honest, and deeply human, forged under the pressure of shared survival and the constant threat of isolation. As Part 2 ends, it's clear that what began as a simple act of survival had evolved into something far more profound. The bond between us had grown stronger with each passing day, shaped by challenges, vulnerability, and the unspoken intimacy of relying on each other for both physical safety and emotional support. The storm, the isolation, and the harsh reality of the island had revealed truths about trust, connection, and the human need for companionship that could never be ignored. The following morning brought with it a quiet sense of determination. After several days stranded, we had settled into a rhythm, each task executed with efficiency born from necessity. Yet beneath the surface, our bond had deepened in ways neither of us could have predicted. The island was no longer just a challenge to survival. It had become a mirror reflecting the trust, vulnerability, and emotions we were developing for each other. We started the day with a simple routine: check the shelter, gather supplies, and assess the shoreline for signs of potential rescue. While I focused on scouting fresh water and edible plants, she prepared the shelter and organized our remaining supplies. Her movements were precise, controlled, and efficient, reminding me once again why I had always admired her in the workplace. Yet here, the admiration took on a more personal dimension. In the harsh clarity of survival, I saw the depth of her courage and determination in ways the office had never revealed. As we worked, the conversation naturally drifted to lighter topics, a coping mechanism against the harsh reality surrounding us. We joked about the irony of being stranded with a boss, shared memories from our previous trips, and laughed at small mistakes that in normal circumstances would have been inconsequential. Yet laughter also became a bridge, a way to navigate the growing intimacy and emotional closeness that circumstances had forced upon us. By mid-morning, we ventured further inland to explore more of the island. Dense vegetation and uneven terrain made the journey physically demanding, but each discovery of fruit, bearing plants, or a secure vantage point was a small triumph. She guided our path, her confidence unwavering while I followed, feeling a blend of admiration, trust, and an inexplicable emotional pull toward her. Every step, every shared glance, strengthened the unspoken understanding that had been growing since the first night. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive. We sought shade beneath a large cluster of trees and took a brief rest, huddling slightly for comfort and warmth. In this quiet pause, she turned to me, her voice softer than usual, repeating the question that had lingered for days. "If no one comes, will you stay with me?" The gravity of the question now carried layers of meaning beyond survival. It was a question of trust, commitment, and emotional connection. It required honesty and reflection, not just instinct. I took a moment before responding. The island had stripped away pretense, leaving only raw emotion and vulnerability. I realized that the days of shared hardship had formed a bond stronger than any professional relationship I had ever experienced. The honesty of our situation demanded an answer rooted in sincerity. "I don't know what the future holds," I said carefully, "but I do know that right now, I want to be here with you." Her eyes softened, reflecting relief, gratitude, and an emotional depth I hadn't anticipated. Our emotional closeness continued to deepen throughout the day. We shared stories from childhood, confided fears and regrets, and explored the complex emotions that arose from being isolated together. Moments that would have seemed inappropriate in a conventional setting felt natural, even necessary. Holding hands to steady each other over rough terrain, leaning together for warmth during breaks, or simply exchanging meaningful glances became subtle gestures of care and affection, reinforcing the connection forged by survival and mutual reliance. By evening, we had returned to the shelter, exhausted but proud of the day's progress. We prepared a small meal using the supplies we had gathered, the fire flickering warmly against the encroaching darkness. Sitting close for warmth, our conversation shifted toward the possibility of rescue. The uncertainty of when, or if, we would be found weighed heavily on both of us. Yet within that uncertainty, there was a quiet comfort in knowing we were not facing it alone. The night was long, as nights had been, filled with the sounds of the ocean and the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures. She leaned slightly against me, seeking warmth and comfort, and I responded instinctively. In the isolation of the island, there was no pretense, no office hierarchy, just two people relying on each other to endure harsh conditions. The intimacy of shared vulnerability created a profound emotional closeness, blurring the lines between friendship, survival, and something deeper. In the days that followed, we continued to adapt to life on the island. Each day brought new challenges, unexpected rainstorms, dwindling supplies, and navigating difficult terrain. But with each challenge, our reliance on one another strengthened. The physical closeness, sharing warmth, supporting each other through exhaustion, and maintaining the shelter together, was matched by emotional intimacy, the understanding that we had become each other's anchor in a world suddenly stripped of normalcy. One particularly cold night, as we huddled together for warmth, she spoke again, this time with a mix of vulnerability and hope. "If no one comes, we'll have each other," right?" I nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. In that moment, survival became secondary to the profound human connection that had grown between us. The storm and isolation had forced honesty, trust, and care to surface, creating a bond neither of us had anticipated when the trip began. The challenges of survival remained constant. We scavenged food, maintained the shelter, and reinforced our signaling efforts for rescue. Each task required coordination, patience, and trust. Yet amid these necessities, our relationship continued to evolve. Shared laughter, gentle teasing, and the comfort of presence became intertwined with our practical survival skills. Emotional reliance and physical support were inseparable, creating a pattern of intimacy and care that defined our days and nights. By the third week, the island had begun to feel like a microcosm of another world, removed from societal rules and expectations. In this space, our bond had matured. We were partners in survival, companions in isolation, and increasingly aware of an emotional and physical connection that transcended mere circumstance. Each evening spent close to one another reinforced the understanding that the island had changed everything between us. Then came the day that would forever alter our perception of time and hope. A distant ship appeared on the horizon. The culmination of our signaling efforts and desperate hope manifested as a tangible opportunity for rescue. We scrambled to make the fire more visible, waving makeshift flags and shouting with renewed energy. The tension was electrifying, the culmination of weeks of isolation, shared struggle, and growing intimacy. Our hands brushed as we worked in tandem, an unspoken acknowledgement of the journey we had endured together. As the ship drew nearer, relief and joy washed over us. Yet even in that moment of potential escape, there was a bittersweet recognition that the experience had forever altered the relationship between us. The island had stripped away barriers, revealing the vulnerability, trust, and affection that had blossomed under extreme conditions. We had survived, yes, but we had also discovered a connection that would endure long after we left the island. Once aboard the rescue vessel, the reality of returning to normal life began to set in. Conversations shifted from survival strategies to recounting events, assessing injuries, and planning our return to civilization. Yet beneath the practicalities, there was an undercurrent of emotional awareness. The bond forged on the island, the shared vulnerability, trust, and care, could not be erased by the passage of time or the return to societal roles. In the weeks that followed, as we reintegrated into work and everyday life, the experience of the island remained vivid. The shared trials, moments of fear, and quiet intimacy had created an unshakable connection. Office hierarchies and professional boundaries felt distant and insignificant compared to the understanding and trust we had developed. Our relationship had been transformed, a testament to the profound impact of extreme circumstances on human connection. Reflecting on the experience, it was clear that survival had been more than a test of endurance. It had been a journey of emotional discovery. The question she had asked on the island, repeated and pondered over days, had evolved from a hypothetical to a reflection of trust, vulnerability, and mutual care. In the end, the deserted island had given us something far more enduring than rescue. It had revealed the depth of our connection, forged in the crucible of adversity. By the end of Part 3, it was evident that the island experience had changed both of us irrevocably. What began as a simple survival scenario had transformed into a profound exploration of trust, vulnerability, and human connection. The storm, isolation, and shared reliance had created a bond that would endure, a reminder that extraordinary circumstances often reveal truths and relationships hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. And so, the story concludes not just with survival, but with an enduring connection that neither time nor circumstance could erase, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and unexpected ways life can bring two people together in the most extraordinary situations.